Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to United Lodge of the Theosophists here in San Diego. Tonight, the title of the presentation is Meditation and Self-Study, and that is going to be given to us by our own Jonathan Colbert. Before we get started, a reading. This is from Light on the Path. Seek out the way. Seek the way by retreating within. Seek the way by advancing boldly without. Seek it not by any one road. To each temperament, there is one road which seems the most desirable. But the way is not found by devotion alone, by religious contemplation alone, by ardent progress, by self-sacrificing labor, by studious observation of life. None alone can take the disciple more than one step onward. All steps are necessary to make up the ladder. The vices of men become steps in the ladder, one by one, as they are surmounted. The virtues of man are steps indeed necessary, not by any means to be dispensed with. Yet, though they create a fair atmosphere and a happy future, they are useless if they stand alone. The whole nature of man must be used wisely by the one who desires to enter the way. Each man is to himself absolutely the way, the truth, and the life. But he is only so when he grasps his whole individuality firmly and by the force of his awakened spiritual will, recognizes this individuality as not himself, but that thing which he has with pain created for his own use, and by means of which he purposes, as his growth slowly develops his intelligence, to reach to the life beyond individuality. When he knows that for this his wonderful complex separated life exists, then indeed, and then only, he is upon the way. Seek it by plunging into the mysterious and glorious depths of your own inmost being. Seek it by testing all experience, by utilizing the senses in order to understand the growth and meaning of individuality and the beauty and obscurity of those other divine fragments which are struggling side by side with you and form the race to which you belong. Seek it by study of the laws of being, the laws of nature, the laws of the supernatural, and seek it by making the profound obeisance of the soul to the dim star that burns within. Steadily, as you watch and worship, its light will grow stronger. Then you may know you have found the beginning of the way. And when you have found the end, its light will suddenly become the infinite light. And so now we give you our very own Jonathan Colbert.
Well, thank you, Monica, for reading that reading out just so beautifully. I was wondering, could somebody find me those our four little books, as it were? One is The Light on the Path, the other is Patanjali, the other is the Gita, and the other is The Voice of the Silence. I should have done that before getting up here.
I'll get them. She's-
Thank you so much. They should be in there somewhere. So, I thought I'd just try this experiment of just kind of speaking from the heart, so to speak, trying to make things more simpler. In the process, the technology got more difficult. I don't know how that worked. But anyway, so meditation and self-study are two really important practices. Oh, thank you, Monica.
Mhm.
And I'm going to be talking about these four books: Light on the Path, and Patanjali, little blue one, and the Gita, right here, and The Voice of the Silence. So in Theosophy, we're not given exact formulas for meditation, nor for self-study. In the older times, you would think of these as more of monastic practices, right? A person is retired for X number of years, where they wanted to go away to a monastery or become a monk and so forth. And people do it even now. And people say that they've come out with, great fruit and that is well worth doing. The theosophical path, I would say, is not that of retirement away from humanity, but generally speaking, it is in full participation in humanity. And that all of one's wisdom or learning or tapas or self-sacrifice, it's really all for humanity, really. And that starts with your relationships and with our family and with our community and so forth, and really for all of humanity. But meditation and self-study, they are indeed about honesty, it would seem, to be really honest with yourself, and it's about integrity in the deepest levels. This is the kind of integrity that assumes that a person is a reincarnating ego. That the reincarnating ego is millions of years old, not hundreds or thousands. That even in this great cycle that we have reincarnated thousands, tens of thousands of time since the lighting up of mind, so to speak, and since we had vehicles and vestures similar to those we have now, in all kinds of civilizations throughout the globe, architectonic shifts and so forth, the rises and falls of continents and civilizations and humanities, you could say. So meditation and self-study is assuming reincarnation. And all of those four books that I held up, they all assume reincarnation. Some of them speak of it more often than others and more explicitly or less explicitly, but they are assuming reincarnation. The quote for today talks about how it's important. Let me find that. It says in the almanac, in the Aquarian Almanac for this week, it says, regarding meditation and self-study, the exercise of the metaphysical imagination must be strengthened daily through meditation in the midst of the therapeutic practice of self-study and the cheerful performance of Dharma. So the kind of meditation and self-study that we're going to be talking about today is not about like an escapism to a nirvana, or like a path to nirvana necessarily. But it is about becoming grounded in that which is invisible, becoming grounded in the abstract. like the Asrata tree with its roots in the unmanifest. And becoming grounded really in our reincarnating egos. So it's an aspiration up to that which is the eternal pilgrim within us, but it's also a bringing down of the three principles, the three in one that represents our higher principles. So it's like a bringing down into action on the plane of instantiation, bringing into the moment our immortality, and actually literally living our immortality to some extent. And I'll try and explain the rationale of that as I go on. So I'll tell you about these 4 books. Now, we just heard from Monica this beautiful reading, and it was talking about seeking out the way. So right off the bat, it's saying that it has to do with the search, and that there's no substitution for strong search. What way is it? Well, everybody's way is different, as it explained, but it is some proportion of the things that was listed off: religious study, devotional practice, studious observation of life, it said, self-sacrificing labor, it said. So all of these things are really the way. And each person has to kind of calibrate their own system, really. So I hope that by the end of this, we won't think that it's a cop-out to say, well, you have to do it for yourself. If anything, meditation and self-study has to do with learning to think for oneself. And as this student would maintain that a person cannot actually do authentic thinking for oneself, which is what Theosophy is all about, without meditation and self-study. Because through meditation, one gains the elevation, you could say, to be able to survey the field and one's own mind. And through self-study, one can penetrate with the kind of honesty that's needed to be able to see if a person is really thinking for oneself or not. HPB talks about the hidden side of nature. She says that really anyone, they could be a materialist, they could be this religion, they could be that religion, doesn't matter all that. What matters is that a person is learning to think for themselves, really. And how often do we really think for ourselves, and how often are we kind of echoing and parroting what other people say? It's an interesting question. But as soon as a person begins to pioneer forth and get out of the old ingrained grooves of thought within oneself and within society, to really come out and be separate and move in the direction of the divine, as HPB says, Godward, then that person is a theosophist. And all the external trappings don't matter about isms and wasms and will-be-isms and things like that. So the Light in the Path is talking about seek out the way, but to me, that book is about individuation and responsibility. And these two are very much wrapped up in one another. It's responsibility for one's own destiny. It's seizing agency and saying, I must be in charge here, because after all, everything I think is generating consequences. So I may as well do this deliberately and thoughtfully. And so it talks about the development and the creation in that reading that Monica read out of the individuality, which is really taking on responsibility. And then it's saying you have to go beyond the individuality. So then you have to renounce. So it's going to be full of paradoxes, and maybe we can work out some of these paradoxes in the discussion afterwards. But the it says that the individuality is something that we use as an instrument. And that it's like something that we can work through. But in moving beyond it, we have to plunge deeply within ourselves. It talks about that, it uses the word plunge. You got to take the dive, and you have to fearlessly, that's what you have to do when you dive off a rock into a mountain lake or something like that, or off of a diving board. At some point, you're fearless and you got to do this. You just plunge. And basically you immerse yourself into the deepest study of not only yourself, but of human nature and of nature itself and of nature's laws, the laws of being, the laws of nature, invisible and visible. And eventually you come to find that we are all fragments of one another. And the way it's described there, we are fragments of the divine. And we may all be struggling, but nevertheless, we're all fragments of the divine. And going deep enough, apparently, according to this roadmap that's being charted out in this reading that was just read, we find a light within. And at first it's very dim. It's like a star, a dim star that can kind of light the way. And that the more we use the light and appreciate the light and bathe in the light, so to speak, the more it becomes like a power in our lives. And the more we can see that it is becoming something more reliable and something more stronger in our life, this inner light. And we begin to see that there's an inner light in other people too. And so we begin to have a sense of appreciation and gratitude and reverence for other people. The degree to which we can find this light within ourselves is the degree to which we can see it in others, it would seem. So that's a few ideas from the light on the path. And this light can become like a permanent, well, it's a star overhead. Some people would call it the light of spiritual discrimination, which is actually going to be our keynote for all of next year in 2025 in the Aquarian series, that lamp of spiritual discrimination. In Patanjali, another book that I held up, we are taught about the control of the mind. And that's the one that is upheld the most often, for sure, as a manual for meditation. And we won't go too deeply into Patanjali. We can go deeper into the discussion later. Suffice it to say that there are 5 modifications of the mind that we have to be cognizant of with reference to meditation. And they are correct perception, incorrect perception, fancy, sleep, and memory. And just briefly, if we are going to meditate, we need to learn to think about one thing and one thing only. If meditation is nothing else, it's thinking about one thing. And with these, there's something about the mind. There's 2 things that are implied in this statement about the modifications of the mind. One is that the default natural state of the mind is pure perception, spectator without a spectacle. The modifications are not the default, they are the modifications. So the mind also, that's it's saying about the characteristic of the mind is that the mind becomes similar, like a chameleon, to whatever it's thinking about. So if I'm thinking about this microphone, then my mind becomes like that, for example. So if I'm trying to think about one thing, and then I think, oh, well, now I'm thinking about something else, it may be a correct perception, but it's still a distraction, right? Or an incorrect perception, that would be a distraction, it would seem like, same thing. Or a fancy, maybe I'm an adept, dream on. Just fanciful things where we just make up stuff in our heads. Sleep, that tends to be a thing that happens when people are trying to meditate. They're like, wait a minute, why am I passing out? This is not good. But memory, here's another one. You know, all these memories start coming up. Start thinking about this, and so said this, and all that stuff. So if nothing else, meditation is learning to focus on one thing. Now, the Patanjali talks about meditating with a seed and without a seed. My understanding of that is when you have a specific object or a specific thought, that's your seed of meditation. And so it's meditation with a seed, but the thought is clothed in some kind of a form, you could say. You haven't gotten to the realm of pure formless essences yet. The idea of meditation is being able to get to the realm of pure formless essences. What is the kernel of what one is thinking about? What is the pure essence? What is the timeless, dimensionless essence of the thought? So a person could be thinking about karma, or the first fundamental proposition, the absolute, to the best one can, or about evolution, whatever it is. What is the very essence of that? And one will find that the degree to which a person can get to the abstract essence of a thought is the degree to which one can get into a current of contemplation, which is different than being distracted, because it's following a line. It could be a creative line. One may even bring a certain amount of mindfulness to directing the current in the beginning, but it's different than discursive reason of rationality. Discursiveness is when a person just kind of has that kind of almost like a rant, you could say, where a person just says a bunch of stuff that comes to their brain, and you don't know where it's coming from. Or it could be a very intellectual person, could just say a bunch of intellectual sounding things, but there isn't a real heart current to it in terms of a real authentic gratitude and joy and reverence, and going to the very heart of an idea or a principle or an ideal. That's another thing that a person can meditate on, is an ideal, not just ideas, but ideals. And it's amazing how Theosophy doesn't say a whole lot specifically about meditation, but it gives you a whole lot to meditate on. I mean, there is no system that one can even imagine that doesn't provide such an amazing plethora of a rich garden of things to meditate on with great benefit. There is this idea of mindfulness in all schools of meditation. And usually we think of mindfulness in relation to the breath. And we would venture to say that the kind of breathing that Patanjali encourages, the kind of Kriya Yoga, if you will, is not so much in relation to Hatha Yoga, where people experience certain quasi-spiritual states of mind from certain breathing techniques, but it's a different kind of mindfulness. First of all, at a minimum, noticing one's breath. Okay, fine. But what does the breath represent? At a spiritual level, there is breathing out and breathing in at a spiritual level. Breathing out might be equivalent to Pravriti Marga, which is the path of forthgoing. B.P. Waddy explains it like that. And the path of Nivritti Marga is the path of the return. So in all things, in all cycle, there's a going out and there's a return. It's like the waves in the ocean, the daily activities that one participates in, and so forth. This can be meditated on in the abstract, and actually above and beyond the personal, above and beyond the realm of me going out, me coming back, things like that. Another breathing, mental breathing, I guess you could call it, would be going out, but in terms of creatively helping others, a person could meditate on that. What is the best way to go about that? So that's like an out breathing, isn't it? An in breathing would be the assimilation of the experience. How did that go? What can I learn? Etc. Now, the Tibetan Buddhists, they talk about Tonglen, right? And that's the idea of, in relation to the suffering of humanity, where you in-breathe the pain and the suffering that one is just aware of. And you out-breathe love and benevolence and healing. So these are like different kinds of kind of a really spiritualized, I would call it a Kriya Yoga, even though that's probably not technically correct because that has to do with the breath. But there is an internal in-breathing and out-breathing that one can be mindfulness. So this is kind of a meditation and self-study that one can bring to a theosophical meditation. So we also would like to mention the Bhagavad Gita here. The Bhagavad Gita is particularly applicable for the person who has meditated on ideas and ideals and who has decided, you know what, it's time to make these things a living part of my whole life. Well, once a person does that, they get problems because we would think that the implementation of an ideal would be beautiful and golden, and it is, but it comes with a certain ordeal, you could say. And that is when we have taken on obstacles. With all efforts at idealism, we are really becoming like the theosophical warrior, if you will, the spiritual warrior. And that's what we're introduced to with the idea of the Bhagavad Gita, because it means it's about the Great War. It's about the Mahabharata. And the Bhagavad Gita is like the song of Krishna, the song of God, the song of the Logos, you could say, the flute of Krishna. And it's Arjuna, the great warrior, who in the beginning has great confidence like any warrior would, and great resolve, and great concentration, and everything that we would think of that a warrior would have. But he undergoes, in the first chapter of the Gita, a great despondency. He realizes that things are not going so well. He didn't think everything through. Now what's happening? He is despondent. He's depressed. And he starts talking to his friend Krishna, and Krishna starts talking to him about philosophy. And you got to begin to face up to things. And if you really want to initiate these ideals into action, you got to think about the immortality of the soul. And that's kind of what the second chapter is a lot about. And about the portrait of the self-governed sage. So he's saying, okay, you're a warrior, but you got to start thinking about these things. And then he starts teaching him philosophy about action, about the incredible transformative power of spiritual knowledge in the fourth chapter. And in the fifth chapter, he talks about renunciation. You have to learn to renounce the fruit of your actions. You can see how all this has to do with self-study, because self-study has a lot to do with letting go. You know, learning and renouncing, learning and unlearning, so forth. And then in the sixth chapter, which is the meditation chapter, it's on meditation. Judge calls that chapter the yoga of restraint. It's interesting that the chapter on meditation is the yoga of restraint. Well, it's actually a devotion by means of self-restraint is the name how he does it. Well, at a minimum, meditation means restraining the mind from going all over the place, right? You're thinking about one thing, right? You have to learn how to think about one thing and one thing only and go deeply into it. And then he tells them a little bit how to do it. He says, you got to set yourself up a place to do it. There's certain, you got to make some kind of an environment that's conducive for that. And Theosophists have been told you need to set up a certain place, a certain time, and so forth, just to get into the idea of the rhythms of nature. You're just taking advantage of the rhythms of nature, really, in doing that. And the idea of the higher self is introduced into the conversation in that chapter. And you have to get used to the idea that we all have a higher self, and that the higher self is our friend. And it's the friend because it helps to raise the lower self. It helps raise the consciousness. Now, the lower consciousness gets kind of squirmy about that and decides that it's not the friend. So the higher self is kind of in some ways the friend of self and also the enemy of self in some ways, right? So, but ultimately, the student needs to start to rely on this higher self, kind of like in Light in the Path, where you start to see the light, and the more you fall into, as the Light in the Path says, a worship of this light, the more you begin to prostrate before it, and you develop a certain kind of obeisance to that light. And so that's kind of what the Gita is about. It's interesting that the next chapter, the 7th chapter, is about spiritual discernment. So it does seem that a person would have to learn to meditate before one could really practice spiritual discernment, it would seem. In other words, discerning is when you're discerning from two different things, two different vibratory rates. Well, wouldn't you have to be able to focus on one thing in order to be able to discern between two things? It just seems that would make sense, that chapter 6 would be before chapter 7 in the Gita, like that. In the Voice of the Silence, which is the 4th book I held up, that's when meditation and self-study becomes real fire. And some people, this is Halloween time, some people think it's the scariest book ever because it's the one that really makes you confront yourself. If you're earnest, in some ways, that book is kind of scary because that is where there's no punches pulled. First of all, the very first page, we're given a warning. This is for those who are ignorant of the dangers of the lower id. So this is like going to a real meditation teacher. This book is, and you're addressed as Alanu. You're assumed that you're one of the few that really is interested in this kind of thing, that you really appreciate this whole inner path, the mystical path, and so forth. And it says you have to learn about dharana, which is the ability to just turn inward. You have to get comfortable with that. You have to be able to do it. And you can't be afraid of what you see when you get there, The first thing it starts talking about is that you have to kind of be careful about the mind. It's a weird place sometimes. And as a matter of fact, the mind has a tendency to distort the real, in the way it says it in the Voice. It calls it the slayer of the real. But you have to slay the slayer. So in a way, you're being addressed as a warrior, just like you were in the Gita, right? And so what's going on with slaying the slayer? Well, you have to take control of the mind. And you have to be able to discern between the real and the unreal, etc. And once again, ultimately, you're trying to learn how to listen to the voice of the silence. See, in the Light in the Path, the analogy was light, right? In the Gita, you have, I guess, sound, because you have the voice of Krishna, right? And in the Voice, it's the voice again, but it's the voice of the silence, mysteriously. Quite a paradox. And the analogy that's given is that you want to be able to conform the pot, like on a potter's wheel, to the mind of the potter. So there's a shaping, a dynamic shaping, like in the potter's wheel, but such that it can conform itself to the mind of the potter. And then a person can begin to get some idea what it might be like to listen to the voice of the silence. And in the voice, we were taught about the idea of the soul. If out on the waves of space, you see the effects of your thoughts and actions and you think this is I, that's not really true. You're not who you think you are necessarily. Or if you retreat and hide in the carapace of selfhood, that's not where you want to be. Apparently, there's a certain fearlessness that's being called for with this whole very noble theosophical ideal that's being described here. So, and we are told about the three halls, for example, you know, the waking, the dreaming, and the sleeping. All this pertains to meditation and self-study. Where is one at any given time? We're told about the two paths. The path that is apparently very wide and easy. And it turns out that's the path ultimately that may seem like it's very spiritual, but it's in some ways selfish. And the voice is very mysterious, says things like, woe to he who does not suffer. Then the other path is talked about, the path of renunciation. It's a very steep path. It's not easy. It's rugged. The feet will bleed, things like that. You know, this idea of the ascent and the descent is very important to think about in relationship to meditation and self-study. Because with mountain climbing, there is an elevation that's gained with the addition of perspective, right? You might go straight up the mountain, you might go zigzag, you might go in a spiral around the mountain, but whatever happens, you're going to get more and more perspective. And the good mountain climbers will pay attention to where the ridges are, where the watersheds are, and so forth, so they won't get lost. But whatever happens, this idea that there is perspective. So meditation is high mountain climbing. It's very alpine. That's why a lot of times you'll see in brochures or something about, you know, a meditational retreat or something like that, they'll show a picture of the Himalayan mountains, you know. It's very forbidding in some ways, but it's rare air and it's beautiful and it's universal. Another altitude thing that we can use with the analogy of meditation and even self-study really is aviation, because there's the takeoff and the landing and so forth. And for people who have studied aviation, it's just so rich with analogies. There's the communication with the tower. There's the taking off, and you can't ascend too fast because you'll end up like Icarus and have problems. They call it going into a stall, and you have to learn how to come out of a stall properly. All these things have analogies with meditation and self-study. And it's the landing that's really the hardest with, you know, the takeoffs and the landing, but especially the landings with meditation. Coming down, you know, without being too abrupt, without too bumpy of a landing, you could say. These are things that are just so, but the idea is the following a procedure. That's the whole thing. That's why pilots do such a good job of landing airplanes. They follow procedure. But these are procedures that a person has to design for oneself. So Theosophy doesn't really offer exact systems for meditation. But this idea of takeoff and landing, I think, is very helpful. And the landing may have something to do with self-study. In other words, knowing your own plastic potency, for example. Knowing what you can do and what's appropriate. And kind of fitting it into the realm of duty, as was said in the Hermes quote that we read from. Yeah, also in the voice of silence, we have the three halls, but you have the two paths, but also you have the seven paramitas. And these are part of the series that we're going through, this year. And we just heard a wonderful presentation on Virya. In a couple of weeks, we'll hear one on Dhyana. So that presentation will go much deeper into meditation than what we're trying to do here, because that's pure contemplation and meditation, that topic. This presentation, we're trying to kind of present the whole thing in light of self-study, and that the meditation provides the perspective for proper, authentic self-study. So the relationship between the two. I've even gone so far as to think that reincarnation are the twin doctrines. They fit within each other like hand in glove. But meditation and self-study are like that too. But they're more like on the abhyasa side, the practice side of things. But they are two sides of the same coin. And they're very important to think of together, because you could say that meditation without self-study can be isolationist. And it's not the isolation that's spoken of in Patanjali, but it can be like a selfish retreat. But with self-study, a person is thinking, wait a minute, what are my motives? And so forth. And the same thing is self-study without meditation can be narcissistic and so forth, and can be too utilitarian in terms of what's in it for me and so forth. A lot of self-study, you could say, is along the lines, if a person is not really incorporating with meditation, it's more along the lines of self-help. What do I need to do for my survival? That kind of thing. And this, if you put the two together, it becomes really kind of the way of the Bodhisattva. And that's what the seven paramitas are really about, the way of the Bodhisattva. And that is really where the voice of silence is bringing a person. Because especially towards the end, remember where it says, I forget how it says it, but it's like, wait, one word. Are you going to dam the waters in the crests of the high mountains? And there's a lot of use of the word water in that third fragment of the voice of silence. And it's really talking about the life of compassion, and that it's generated in the realm of the high altitudes of insight, you could say, and into the nature of what compassion is. Are you going to keep it to yourself, or are you going to try and help as many people as you can come into contact with about this great wisdom fount of knowledge? And are you going to dedicate and consecrate your life really to the help of humanity? So these are some ideas about meditation. I would just say, and self-study, I would just say a few more things in conclusion. In terms of daily meditation and daily self-study, the rubber hits the road kind of part of this. The idea of daily meditation is that you're taking advantage of the rhythms of nature. And we all live in bodies, that are part of nature, really. And so our bodies have biorhythms, you could say. Different rhythms are built into the system. And the fact that there's these three halls where we go into sleep and then deep sleep every night, which is really a spiritual state, and then come back into the physical form, is part of the theory, you could say, on the idea of daily meditation. Different people have to choose different times, but many people like to choose the earliest part of the morning, like a dawn meditation, just because their brain's not all full of chatter by then, right? And where have they been? They've been in this wonderful realm of Sushupti a few times throughout the night. So the brain's not too complicated. It's virginal, it's chaste, and it can be thinking about these great ideas. One other thing would be perhaps is to not read too much. Read something, great. There's wonderful things to read, but nothing beyond maybe, I don't know, but just not too much. I'm tempted to say not more than a paragraph or something like that, but maybe it's only one sentence. But then to close the book and to think about that and to challenge oneself, how long can I think about this? You know, can I set a time for that? You know, and so because reading is great, and think about how many meetings we all go to, right? So you have to read a lot to even study to get ready for the meeting. But in terms of actual meditation, there's two things. One is to think that if a person is meditating by studying a lot and roaring through a bunch of pages like a fast train, that's the equivalent of a gluttony in a way, because it's like eating too much, you know, and eating too fast and talking while you're eating, right? It's the opposite of being calm, right? And it's the opposite of thinking about one thing at a time, right? Because in paragraphs have lots of things in them, right? So that might be a clue. Then if a person is really going vertically in one's meditation, going not only to the deepest essence, but to the highest, most refined, abstract source of any given idea or ideal, a person is really bringing down their own reincarnating ego. The highest principles, the Atma and the Buddhi and the Manas, is really being activated, at least for a time period. And do we think that this is the first time that we've ever thought about karma or ever thought about the absolute? In all of these thousands of lifetimes that we've had, there must be some extent that if we are really going to meditate, we are bringing down soul memories. And we may not recognize them. You know, I was Mrs. So-and-so, I was Mr. So-and-so in this particular life. All that stuff doesn't matter. The point is that we're going home to a place within ourselves that's thought about these things before. Another thing maybe to take into account is that there are wise beings. Some people call it a fraternity. Maybe people think that's sexist, but it's I was going to say a brotherhood, a community of dedicated, consecrated souls that are relatively perfected from our point of view, that think about these ideas all the time. It's what they do. So we, in going and thinking about meditating on ideas really in earnest, are, I guess, tapping into their current. So it's not a group meditation really, because it's an individual path. One is thinking about things on one's own, but we are joining the ideation of great beings, really. So that's something else to kind of think about, you know, something that we don't always think about. It's not just my meditation, right? It becomes a community, if you will, of great beings and of philosophers that have existed in the past or that will exist in the future. See how all this time, space stuff and so forth, it can go away with real meditation, because you're going to the timeless and dimensionless essence of things. And now, similarly, with the self-study side of things, there is the idea of the Pythagorean review, where nightly, before one goes to sleep, one could take stock of what happened during the day. And this is particularly relevant in relation to one's ideals and one's goals and one's resolves, or in a kind of a secular monasticism sort of way in terms of one's vows that one might have committed oneself to. So it wasn't not just what happened. Okay, this happened. I picked up the newspaper and then I drove someplace. But what happened in relation to the vibration of it? How does it feel in terms of the goals and in terms of one's objectives that one has set up for oneself? And so probably particularly in relation to one's speech, because that's the one where a whole lot of karma is in there, you know, in terms of what we hear people say and how we react, and how were we able to think creatively on our feet in such a way that we were able to diffuse the situation? Were we able to lend any kind of healing to that karmic cycle and so forth, like that? And these are the things that we actually think about. My understanding is at the moment of death, in the death review. There's an ancient saying that says, there's no such thing as a second harvest. In other words, if you've pulled all the fruit out of a tree or all the wheat out of a field and so forth, well, you can't go out there and harvest the same field again. So with this daily review, if a person has assimilated what happened during the day, then the moment of death will be cleaner and more pure, more coherent, and the even the after death states will be more streamlined, because one has done a lot of assimilating. Remember, the Devahanic state is one of assimilation. If a person is interested in all, the idea that they don't want to spend a lot of time between lives, that they want to come back and help humanity, it's one thing to speak glibly about that. Oh, this is what I want to do. But to be able to participate in the actual hard work that might be involved with that, which would be the meditation and the self-study while one lives, such that the after death states don't need to take too long necessarily, and so that one could actually come back into a new form to participate, to help, and so forth, then that would be relatively done karma-lessly, you could say, with less friction, you could say. So these are just some ideas. It all has to do with awakening the deepest part of ourselves. When Buddha was asked, what makes you the Buddha, or what makes you you? Basically, his answer was, I'm awake. So in other words, he had accomplished what we're all in the direction of over eons, really. And there's no difference between ourselves and a Buddha. We all have this inner light. We all have this inner voice. We just need to learn to listen to it. And meditation and self-study is part of that path. So, Monica, do you want to kind of, the way you would do it, if you, it's just kind of, you'll be able to just be like in a normal computer meeting at home, I think, is the way it'll work.
Stop share of the.
Yeah, okay, we'll start with that. I'll stop share. And I see above here all the our attendees. So we'll enter into questions now. I have one to kick things off, Jonathan. You spoke about meditation with or without a seed. And the idea of getting into a current, so that I would liken it to a flow of energy that comes into the aura of the soul, that or the person who's meditating. But what is odd to me is that you never use the word mantra in this entire thing in referring to meditation. So my question is meditation with seed, would that include the use of a mantra?
Would meditation with a seed include the use of a mantra? I think so. Are there any more questions? No. Yeah. No, I think so. Mantras, you know, all of the theosophical literature is mantramic. It's just all the sentences in all of the literature. It's really deploying the use of sound, and a lot of, the Secret Doctrine and the Voice of Silence and the Bhagavad Gita, the kind of the secret tablets from which the voice and the secret doctrine comes from. These were all, studied, different versions of which were chanted in the secret sanctuaries, in antiquity. The Gita is even chanted even now, in Sanskrit by Vedanta and other kinds of scholars and so forth. But I think one thing would be if a person says a mantra, it's very important to think through the meaning of it.
Yes.
Even if a person says something as simple as the Om, whether the Om pronunciation or the AUM pronunciation, it's very important to not let it be ritualistic. What do I mean by that? You think it through and you meditate on it. And so that way it comes from within, without. I think that might be another clue about what meditation is learning how to function from within, without, and from above, below, it would seem. Does anybody else have any comments on that question? Does anybody raise their hand on that?
Let me see. Oh, Desiree does. Hi, Des.
Hi. Yeah, it's a relative question, I think, because it has to do with what you mentioned about Tonglen and the breathing in and the breathing out, and to breathe out benevolence. And I was wondering, how is that also in relation to speech? Because we know how important sound and speech are. Is there a correlation there too?
Yeah, speech. It says in the Secret Doctrine, it can either be a curse or a healing, a blessing. And it just has got, whatever it is, it's got a lot of power. And Judge talks about how we need to use with care those living messengers called words.
Mm-hmm.
And so that care is like where the meditation, it would seem, that would come in. So the meditation is grounding oneself in the laws of nature, the laws of harmony, and in reality, really. And the self-study is being able to know where one's coming from, know the mistakes that one has made in the past, which is fine. Don't get excited about mistakes. Mistakes are good. The idea is to learn from them and to calibrate things and to think through the effect of our speech, it would seem. There's people that have had NDEs have talked about how some of them have had experiences where they're able to see things from the point of view of other people. Well, what if we could learn to do that just with our imagination? The Hermes quote had something to do with the daily strengthening of the imagination, right? And that has to do with meditation. And that this could find its way into really the therapeutics of speech. So that what we say can have a healing, calming, beneficent effect on people. What we say can actually instill self-confidence in other people. And can we speak with a certain amount of sweetness, really? Can we have a sense of humor about ourselves so that we're not, uptight and kind of constricting the situation and giving space for people to learn and grow. And it would seem that our speech with meditation, if a person was really coming from a place of gratitude and reverence, would actually have kind of a mantramic effect, it would seem. But especially if a person was trying to articulate universal ideas. And, it's interesting that when we have lodge presentations, all the people that give these aquarium presentations and in the universal theosophy presentations, they speak one mantra after another. And it works really well. And it's a delivery system for these high ideas. And they've been crafted by these wise beings. And it's amazing how much the English language, we laugh at the English language because it's kind of crude and it's transactional and so forth. And it's not able to offer the beautiful intonations that the Sanskrit does. But think of Shakespeare, how mantramic that is, right?
Oh.
And what can be done with someone who really is a lover of the craftsmanship of speech.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you, Desiree. Richard Pouncey has his hand up. You've got to unmute, Richard.
Hey, Jonathan, I want to give you some flowers more or less versus asking the question. I think that you've done a really good job with your stand up and shooting from the hip lecture, and I'm looking more forward for that because I think you're doing a trailblazing job, trailblazing right now, setting a new standard, which I like to thank you for. Also, the comment that you made about reading just one or two lines, I think that's very valid because I can speak for myself is that if I overread, I don't retain everything that I read anyway. So focusing in on just the one or two line and then, extracting as much from that as possible. I think that's a really good valid point on meditation, and I'll land with that.
Thank you, Richard. Beautiful. I do stand-up comedy too sometimes. No, I'm just kidding. No, that's really well taken to go deep instead of too much. Like you say, it's really hard to retain when there's too much, right? Yeah. Thank you very much, Richard.
I would agree with that. There's a message from Shoba in the chat. Gosh, Jonathan, this was like listening to a great jazz exposition. Here. I truly enjoyed the extempore style and the riffing. Thanks.
The riffing?
Yes.
That's cool.
That's great.
Thanks.
Thanks, Shoba.
That's a real compliment. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you,
so
Shoba.
Ken, unmute yourself, please.
Oh, actually, I think I'm on these speakers, these.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
You wanna just come up and-
everything. Okay.
We'll do a double
You wanna
stand-up.
come up?
Oh, okay. I was gonna just stay here because I think.
Oh, you can just stay right there. Do whatever you want to do.
Yeah, okay. So on the idea of the intentionality of the words, I'm reminiscing that even Saint Teresa de Avila in her book from the 1570s on the interior castle, she advises that the other nuns, because she's writing just to the nuns, right? Being kind of sexist, that they should have the right intention when they say their prayers. And as you were saying, and even the whole presentation today, generate that from the heart. And then she kind of gives a criticism, some of the nuns that are just praying by rote. She said, that's not really prayer. It's kind of funny in that regard. And so I think that's a really powerful thing that, as you said, that in the meditational work and then in our day-to-day life as theosophists, try to act from within, without, and then bring things from above to below into our day-to-day life. So I really appreciate that reminder, that advice that you gave us today. Thank you.
Oh, no, thank you for underscoring something that seems like it's really important. It's interesting that really there is another dimension to this. We mentioned that we are joining a community, a choir of souls that are ideating on these high themes when we are, even in our private meditations. But there is the idea also that thought is very powerful and it goes out into the whole world, and that it not only helps this great community of meditators, but in some ways it might affect the Sushupti of people who are even in sleep, or it might affect their prayers. Not that we want to be busybodies climbing in people's heads, but just the vibration of it, right? The beneficent healing vibration, it would seem. And what if somebody, George William Russell writes about this, where he talks about how our moods and our thoughts and so forth, we're all interconnected. In other words, universal brotherhood isn't a good idea. It isn't something that we should try and create. It's something that's already happening. It's the law of interdependence. So that means we're all connected intimately, not just theoretically. So if we are in moods, perhaps, of feeling depressed and we don't know why, or just down randomly, what the heck's going on? What if it was, according to George William Russell, what if somebody who also is depressed, maybe they're thinking of suicide, maybe they're confused, maybe they're at a crossroads and so forth. Maybe they don't even know it, but maybe they're reaching out to us. And George William Russell asked the question, right? Would we give in to moods of despair so easily if we thought that maybe perhaps one has a responsibility, if one can, to try and aspire and to change the mood, you could say, within one's own sphere by meditation and by thinking of the, kind of resetting the imagination, you could say, in this whole sphere of self-study and the cheerful performance of duty.
Thank you. I just like to, we're all contributing to the collective in one way or another,
Yeah.
is what I feel I'm hearing you say. And I'm looking at two things that you said. One, you quoted Christ in come ye out and be separate.
Yeah.
So saying, make this choice.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to be contributing one way or another. So
Yes.
make this choice.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that you said was, we are all fragments of the divine, which reminded this student of Mr. Judge's quote repeated so many times, acting for and as the self of all. So those two ideas. David Grossman has his hand up.
Oh, thanks. Thanks, Jonathan, for a great experience here, going into the inner areas. But, I was wondering, some of the ideas that have come up tonight early on, mantra was mentioned, the word, sound, states of consciousness, moods, affecting others by our moods. These seem all to circle around a bit, the idea of vibratory rate.
Mm.
Could you say something more about the idea of vibratory rate in terms of ideas, in terms of feelings, and really in terms of everything almost? And
Okay, well,
and maybe also touch on how we can shift our vibratory rates when needed. Yeah.
very good. Thank you. I'll try. It's a very potent question. It's interesting that in Theosophy we're taught that really it's all law, and even thought has a certain physics that goes on with vibration, and all that is acting according to law. And a Judge talks about I think he calls it the Shabda Brahman, and it's like the fundamental vibration of the whole cosmos. It's like the sustaining effort of vibration. And it's what keeps the whole universe alive and thriving. It's the basis of all law. And it's what brings into existence everything from the realm of thought and into the realm of action. And it's what's behind all sound. It's what's behind all vibration. And it would seem that meditation on this idea of the one sound throughout the cosmos, kind of a logoic sound, the music of the spheres, some people might call it, but would have, would give a person not only the altitude, but the detachment from all the brain chatter, that we have. So that one becomes, instead of thinking about all thoughts, one goes from there to something that's called in the voice of the silence, all thought. And, but like the questioner observes, everything is vibration. So it isn't just altitude, but it's going to the more causal realms of vibration, it would seem. And that, a person would have to be very calm, it would seem, to think like that, to really discover those planes and so forth. David, did you have anything else that you'd like to add?
Not really, although that term you just used, I think that there's a lot to meditate on that, the causal realms of vibration. I think that's, thanks for that.
Hey, we got a mantra. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
Have another,
in the chat one more time. Ed Moskowitz is asking, could you comment on the saying, meditation is not what you think?
I'll do the best I can. I think, I don't know this writer, but it's probably it's not going off to some retreat necessarily. It could include that, but it's not necessarily that. It's nothing woo-woo. Are you guys all familiar with the expression woo-woo? Okay. Woo-woo. Like where it's kind of a false drama, fantasizing that you're somebody that you aren't, you're some kind of yogi or something like that. Instead, something actually that maybe anyone can do, or at least anyone can attempt. And the attempt is the main thing. The success, don't worry about it, forget it. It's the attempt, and to do it every day, if one can, and hopefully at the same time. But the main thing is the attempt, because meditation is like anything related to the will. First of all, the will is a whole esoteric occult topic. And in some ways, the theosophical literature doesn't offer much about the will, except for in rare places and these little comments that you see from Judge or from Patanjali, you know what I'm saying, or HPB will say something about Fohat or something. And it's in all these isolated places that you find little comments and clues about what the will is. Mm-hmm. And the thing is that meditation and self-study does have to do with the development of the will. And the will is something that's ubiquitous. It's almost like the air, but it's channeled and focused by desire. And desire has to do with that, in turn, is focused on who we think we are, right? Mm-hmm. If I think that I'm my body, then my desires are going to be accordingly. If I think that I'm my mind, my desires probably will be something according to that. If I think that I am a pilgrim, on a pilgrimage alongside millions and billions of other pilgrims, then my desires are going to be something like that. And that's going to arouse and focus will in those directions. How do I develop the will? It's like exercise. You do it by doing it. And the more you do it, the more you can do it, right? Anything to do with the will is something that there's no technique to actually develop it. You develop it by just doing it. It's like riding a bicycle. You learn to do that. You can't do that theoretically. But you learn all those principles of balance and everything like that by what? Doing it and making mistakes. And anything to do with discipline or meditation or self-study, or even learning how to help others. You just start doing it and you get better at it and you learn from mistakes, but that's all part of it. So I don't really know exactly what context he was saying that in, but it's a funny statement and I appreciate the point. Did you have what was his name? Ed?
Ed, did you have a response?
Yeah, did
Something?
he have a kind of an inside understanding of what that meant in terms of where you got that from?
No. Oh, okay, yes, Ed, please.
Yeah, it's sort of a double entendre. First, it's one
No,
that's suggesting that you're not, you don't really know what meditation is. It's just the idea of meditation, but also the process of meditation is not about thinking. It's to go beyond thinking to the source of thinking. So I wanted you.
It's not what you think it is. Now I get it. I'm a little slow. Yeah, no, I get it. It's not what you think it is, because because it does seem like that it's going beyond discursive thinking, which is kind of a horizontal. I think of discursive thinking as like skimming stones at a lake. You throw the thing and it bounces on the water. That's kind of what your mind is doing. It's just bouncing along, right? It's not, and it's true. And I was saying that it has to do with thinking of only one thing at a time. But I think it has to do with more like dwelling on something and kind of going to the inside essence of what you're thinking about, which might be some word for that beyond the word thinking, possibly. Because thinking has to do with, a lot of times we think of it as comparison and contrast, And that's kind of the idea of what you do with meditation with a seed. You think about it. How's this thing? What does it look like? What is the shape? How does it compare with other things? That kind of dualistic kind of thinking. But there is such thing as going to the very essence of a thought or an ideal. Oh, is anybody keeping track of the time?
5:49.
Oh, okay.
I have something here from Lizette. Jonathan, this presentation is a gift to all. Here.
Oh, great.
Thank you for the clear references and for the reminders of our real call, especially on our Dharma and our collective responsibility for greater universal brotherhood. It's lovely.
Beautiful.
Yes.
Thank you, Liseth.
Victor Williams, thank you, Jonathan and Theosophy. And Ken, you have your hand up.
Yes, a question, Jonathan. One thing I saw in Scientific American last year is that when people have similar experiences, whether they're together in a room or eating dinner at a table or something like that, their electroencephalographic, their EEG brainwaves will synchronize with each other. It's kind of, I didn't know that happened. So until last year, I was like, oh, that's surprising. But would you say that this is like a gross physical analogy to the idea that when we're meditating, as one of the practices you said, to reach upward to the community of great spirits, that we can then allow our, sort of human brain waves to synchronize with their pattern?
Yeah, I think you're right in terms of an analogy.
Yeah.
Because I think that the brain waves that are able to be registered on an electroencephalogram might be more coarse than the Akashic vibrations that real meditation would involve, it would seem. But I think it's a great analogy. That's what I think, but I could be wrong. So
Thanks, yeah. As we sort of go through that renunciation of our individual egotistical wants and desires, and then align with the desires of the higher self and this community of great adepts.
yeah, because speaking of vibration, the study of space is like when you read in the Secret Doctrine about space. It turns out the space is not empty. There's just nothing empty. It's all full. It's all a great plenitude. And it's full of, it's a great ocean. And the English words don't have any come anywhere close to it, but the Sanskrit idea of the akasha, the great oceanic akasha, that's all vibration. And that's the fundamental characteristic of the akasha is sound. If you can say anything about it, you can say that it's sound. So these highest exalted meditators in the cosmos that we can, you know, aspire to or admire, at least, they are putting out a kind of harmony and cooperation. And that's why they're like a fraternity or a community and so forth.
Would that be like the Guardian Wall?
Yes, I think so. Yeah. Well, that's probably a good place to.
Well, not before I tell you that Mr. Jim Tepfer is here. Wonderful talk, lucid, deep, and accessible. It was a delight to listen to it.
Well, that's very kind, Jim. Thank you.
Beautiful.
You want to tell us what's up next week? Oh, yeah, that's Attractus.
Yes, okay, so this will be it for the evening. Desiree, your hand is up. Did you mean it to be up?
No, I just wanted to, well, yes, but I just wanted to let Jonathan know that this was a beautiful presentation and you've just given us so much to meditate on. And I wanted to add that I think one of the masters mentioned that probably reverence is the most important basis from which to begin meditation. Had he looked upon an atom with the same reverence as a galaxy. And I think, at least for this student, it really gives perspective on the attitude and perspective at which to approach meditation. But thank you so much, Jonathan. This was beautiful.
Well, thank you, Desiree. That was a critical component. Thank you so much for bringing in reverence. Thank you.
Beautiful. Lori Kelly says, thank you, beautiful talk.